Well, hello. I welcome to our insurance gaps webinar. This is something I'm real happy that we're able to do, and I'm happy that I've got Holly Sofer with me from the American Association of Public Insurance Adjusters. She's their general counsel, and I think this is a very important webinar, and we're trying to raise both awareness as well as start to go ahead and get people to participate with respect to what I think is one of the most important aspects of insurance coverage problems today, and that's insurance gaps. And just so everybody knows how one person can make a difference, and if you get somebody really involved with it, and where we are today, this came about for me when I was with a public adjuster just over a couple months ago, Guy Cohen, a public adjuster down out of Miami, and I was talking to him about joining the Florida Association of Public Insurance Adjusters, and we were talking about the various trends. And one of the things he mentioned to me, he said, you know, my biggest problem that I've got when I go out to law sites now is I go out there and there's a water loss, and all of a sudden all the insurance companies have exclusions for water losses, or they got a limitation of like $5,000 or $10,000, and no matter what I do, I can't get enough money back from the policyholder. And I ask the policyholder, why is it that this problem came about? And they say, well, our agent said, hey, I got a cheap insurance policy, you know, for you, or cheaper than somebody else, and they don't mention that one of the number one cause of the loss is now being excluded or limited under the insurance policy. He told me, he said, you know, everybody talks about the various issues of, you know, of public adjusting. That's my number one issue right now, Chip, is insurance gaps. And I'm listening to him and I'm thinking, geez, about a month and a half ago, I was up in Chicago with Holly. And after this meeting we had with all these leaders of the various associations, and Holly came up to me and said, you know, Chip, I'm working on this issue of insurance gaps. And we at the American Association of Public Insurance Adjusters think that this is the number one issue for policyholders. It's for the contractors and the restoration people that are doing the work. It's for public adjusters, because if you don't have the coverage and you've got a gap and there's some problem with respect to the protection of the coverage, what good does the insurance do for you? And she told me how she was working with Jay Feynman at Rutgers University, how she was working with Amy Bach at United Policyholders. And I'm on the board of directors of United Policyholders. I called out to Amy. Amy goes, Chip, we've been starting to meet with some of the insurance commissioners on this various thing, and they've actually got a working subcommittee on this various problem. One of the things you can do, because you know a lot of the public adjusters and the problems that come up, we need examples of insurance gap problems. Can you get people to do something? And so all this is in my back of my head, and I told Guy, I said, you know what, I'm going to do something about this, and we're going to raise awareness. I'm going to call Holly. I talked to Holly, and she said, why don't we go do this insurance gap webinar to start to raise awareness about this with everybody, you know, who might be affected. I mean, honestly, if you're a contractor, you can't get the cover. How's somebody going to pay you? You know, if you're an adjuster, you have nothing to adjust. And if you're the policyholder, you're looking at their guy, I thought I had full coverage, and you're not able to take care of the problem. So, you know, having said that, Holly, you've done a great job. I appreciate you for, you know, being with us on the webinar, really spearheading this particular issue. And maybe you can go
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
We got you.
Got you. Thanks, Chip. And I really wanted to start out by saying I appreciate everything that you and your entire team in your office have done to put this webinar together for us. As I said, as Chip has said, Chip and I met for the first time, I think, or the second time in Chicago, and we were talking about this very important issue. But let me just back up and introduce myself. As Chip said, my name's Holly Sofer. I have been in law for more than 30 years now, so I don't really like to count the years anymore. And I've been the counsel for the American Association of Insurance Adjusters for the past 10 years. And during that time, I've also done some work for individual public adjusters, regulatory work, and I've really met a lot of people throughout the industry. But I want to begin by telling you a little bit about Apia and who we are and how we got started before we begin to talk about the coverage gap issue. Apia was started in 2004 by a small group of public adjusters who wanted some input on the drafting of the NAIC Model Act. And that act, by the way, has really been the gold standard for legislation throughout the country on licensing of public adjusters. While we were at NAIC, we got to know a lot of insurance commissioners, other regulators, and we've continued throughout those years to focus on regulatory monitoring, legislative monitoring. And I can tell you that the way we do that is every single day we get emails if there's any proposed legislation or regulation affecting the public adjuster industry comes across my desk at about 4 a.m. in the morning, when I'm not there yet, but I read it as soon as I come in. But Apia has really been focused on lobbying in terms of, as we said, monitoring legislation, but also educating people on the value of a public adjuster. Education, and we're going to talk about how that it's going to be important with the coverage gap issue, is probably the single most important thing we do. And you would be surprised, Chip, and those of you watching to hear this, but we've met regulators who don't even know what a public adjuster is. We've met, in fact, one was the chief of staff of a Department of Insurance, so I won't name him. So we see our job as publishing articles, educating regulators, educating legislators, and educating the general public on the value of public adjusters and what you bring to the claims process. So during that time, while we were doing our focus on, again, our regulatory and legislative work, we've been talking to people over the past few years, and we've been hearing from our members and from other people in the industry, in the nonprofit sector, in the regulatory sector, about this issue that we've identified as the coverage gap. And what we're going to be talking about today is to identify what is it, what is the coverage gap, and what are we going to do about it. We're going to identify it and then tell you what our plan of action is to actually do something about it. And we've already begun this process. So I'm going to be talking about what we have done and what we will be doing. So right now I'd like to play a video, and I'm hoping that of Professor Jay Feynman, but maybe I should introduce him first. We met Jay Feynman, who's professor, a distinguished professor of law at Rutgers Law School. I met him at his seminar last year, and I've known him over the years. And what he's done is really give us a framework of what it is that we're talking about when we say coverage gap. What is it that we're talking about? And before we identify specific examples, I just want to let you know what it is. So Jay Feynman has talked about something called the protection gap. And that's something that Amy Bach of United Policyholders has been working on, and others in the nonprofit sector, other law professors. And what they're talking about is different types of protection gaps, which will eventually lead us to what the purpose of today's seminar is, and that is the coverage gap. So different types of protection gaps are people who are completely uninsured. We all know what that is. People who are underinsured. Again, you're all familiar with that. The risk protection gap, and Chip, you and others in Florida certainly know about risk protection gaps, where you have coverage, but not all of the risks are covered. So maybe you don't have hurricane coverage or sinkhole coverage or earthquake coverage. And that's a problem, again, that a lot of people in the country are working to fix, because these types of protection gaps and coverage gaps, in addition to hurting consumers and making the public adjuster's job more difficult, it has a definite effect on the economy in a bad way when people can't repair their homes after damage. So the next thing is the claiming gap. And again, this is the space where public adjusters operate. The claiming gap is where you have insurance, but what Jay and others have called factors in the claim process result in a failure to pay fully. And that's, again, the space where public adjusters operate to help people navigate their losses and adjust their losses. And then we come to the last category of protection gaps, and that's what we call the coverage gap. And that's the purpose of our seminar today, to talk about what is the coverage gap and what we can do to help solve this complex problem. What we've defined as the coverage gap, again, based on this framework, is the difference between what a homeowner, and again, we're going to focus mostly now on homeowners, but it also applies to business owners and other property owners as well. But the difference between what a homeowner would reasonably expect to be covered in a policy and what is actually covered. And now I'm going to introduce, before we go on, Jay Feynman, who again has given us a lot of research and is working on something we're going to talk about in a little while as a solution to this problem. I'm going to let him introduce himself and talk about what he's doing, just for a second.
I'm Jay Feynman, professor at Rutgers Law School and co-director of the Rutgers Center for Risk and Responsibility. Our Insurance Law Center has two projects that address the protection gap. Essential Protection for Policyholders, in cooperation with United Policyholders, aims to improve state regulation of homeowners insurance. Every state regulates insurance, but states differ dramatically in how much and what kind of protection they provide for insurance consumers. Essential Protections surveys law across the country and recommends best practices that states can adopt in helping consumers to buy insurance, ensuring they have adequate coverage, providing for a fair claims process, and providing special protections for disaster victims. We've also begun a national conversation about the protection gap, beginning with a large conference in March 2019. We want to engage industry representatives, coverage lawyers on both sides, academics, consumer advocates, public adjusters, legislators, regulators, and others in a discussion about what constitutes a protection gap, where protection gaps occur, why they happen, and what cures there might be. That way, we can get consumers better information on insurance and make it more likely that consumers will have more insurance.
Holly, I'm not certain if anybody can hear what he's saying.
For more information, go to our website, crr.rutgers.edu.
Thanks, Jay, for that talk about essential protections for policyholders. And I hope that those of you that were listening were able to hear his video and not just to see him discussing. But basically, Jay was introducing himself and talking about the complex issue and what we can do to solve it. So what our strategy on solving this issue is to use our expertise and skill that we've developed over the years at Apia to first educate people and then act. And we have long-term goals and we have short-term goals. Before we even get to these examples, which you see on your screen, our long-term goal, and right now, of course, it is aspirational, but the long-term goal is to develop a minimum standards policy. And that's what people in the nonprofit sector are doing right now. People like Professor Feynman, people like Professor Schwartz in Minnesota, and people like Amy Bach, who's the executive director of United Policyholders. They, with our input, are working on a minimum standards policy that we would love to see every state adopt. In it, also, we are working on what we call third-party seal of approval. So before all the states have adopted this minimum standards policy, we would have a policy on our side, and we would be able to compare every other policy to that policy. And then if it meets those minimum standards, Amy's company or organization, United Policyholders, would put her seal of approval on it. So that way, getting back to what Chip was saying, if you're a homeowner and you're going to purchase insurance, most people just purchase based upon price. They do price comparison. So this way, people can go compare prices, and if this policy that they're purchasing has that seal of approval, they know that it's okay. So again, those are the long-term goals, which at this point are aspirational. But what we have is a plan to get there. We want to make a path so that we can get to those long-term goals without issue. And the way we do that is by having shorter-term goals and that we meet along the way. And the first one is education. And I'm going to get to in a minute who we are educating. But the purpose of having shorter-term goals, and I'm going to talk about what those are to build relationships and trust so that we meet with regulators. Right now, I've had meetings in different states with different regulators. We go to NAIC, we meet with the people on the committee that Amy was talking about, the Transparency Committee, and we slowly change perceptions. And this is our strategy. We make small incremental changes. We educate people, and I'll talk about the slow changes that we want to make. And the strategy is to do this in a way that when we're ready for the big ask, when we're ready to get to the aspirational goal, that's just the last step in a long process that we've already started. they'll already know who we are. We've built trust with these legislators. We've built trust with legislators, so that when we're ready to take that last step and see if we can implement minimum standards policy, again, it's just the last step in a long process. So we're going to make small incremental changes, but in a strategic way. And that has fueled our success at Apia. It's the way we've addressed our legislative and regulatory work and has contributed to a lot of our success. So who are we? What are the problems that we're trying to solve with these coverage gaps? And again, today's seminar really isn't on what the coverage gaps are. It's more what we can do about it. But I just wanted to identify for you some of the common ones that we've been talking about. And again, those of you who are public adjusters who are listening are even more familiar with this than me and have been sending me and sending Chip these examples. Starting with, and it's mostly water policies. I just wrote a paper that was meant for consumers that Amy Bach had asked me to write to identify problems with water damage claims. So a lot of them are limitations that are hidden in endorsements, such as, again, amount of coverage for water damage claims. There are some policies that limit water damage claims to $10,000, but it's confusing for consumers because it's not in the main body of the policy. It's hidden on page 74 in fine print in an endorsement. Other coverage gap issues are pipe access. State Farm's policy limits access to pipes after water damage claims. And that is a complicated issue that, again, is in an endorsement, so that the insurance company is only paying to access the pipe at the spot where the breakage occurred and not the entire pipe. Limitations with wildfire damage in California. Before, after the last wildfires, there were policies which, believe it or not, excluded wildfire from the definition of fire and gave a $5,000 limitation on that. So people who thought they had purchased fire policy damage coverage for their home were limited to $5,000. And if you watch the news this morning, you'll see that there are wildfires spreading all through the area north of LA today. So there are probably going to be people that wake up tomorrow who lost their homes and who are going to find out that they don't have the coverage that they need. And again, that's where we're stepping in to try and solve this problem. Other limitations are period of time exclusions for, I have water leaks here on the slide, but it's really, as you know, leaks aren't covered anyway. It'd be for water damage claims. And what those are, State Farm in particular has said that the claim isn't covered if it occurs over a period of time, but doesn't define what period of time is. So it could be 5 minutes, it could be 2 weeks. Other policies put a period of time, usually 7 days or 14 days. So this is completely vague, doesn't say what a period of time is. Marring, I've been getting lots of emails now about policies that limit hail damage claims, so that if the roof is hit and damaged and what they consider just marring, but doesn't go through the roof and cause a hole in the roof, that it's not covered. There are policies that say their full replacement value, such as Farmers, but then in the middle of it, there's a chart for your roof. So it's really only replacement value if your roof is brand new. If it's 2 years old or 5 years old, they start depreciating the value, so that if your roof is 10 years old, you're only going to get the value of a 10-year-old roof, even though you've purchased a replacement value coverage policy. Matching is another issue. Another bad one is concurrent damage exclusions. For those of you who don't know what that means, if your damage is caused by two totally different causes, one of which is covered and one of which is not covered, then it's not covered. Even if the type of damage that caused the loss is really the substantial factor in causing the damage to the home, if there's any other cause that also came in, like wind and rain, then it's not covered under those concurrent damage exclusions, which are very limiting and very confusing for homeowners who really don't understand what's going on. So again, what can we do about this? We talked before about long-term goals and short-term goals. And what we want to do here at Apia, and working with Chip and Apia is in this unique position right now where we have contacts in all the different industries and all the different players that are working on this project. We talked to the nonprofit sector, as we said, who are trying to develop the minimum standards policy and helping to, and Amy, who does such great work, helping to educate consumers. So we're stepping in and helping to educate people by doing articles, by doing blogs, and also by coming up with, and not us specifically, but people we work with, educational materials for consumers. I know there's great work being done in that area in terms of coming up with comparison charts so that people know what it is they're purchasing. Just think about it. When you buy health insurance, very often it comes with a nice little chart that lays out, I pay $20 if I go to my primary care physician and $30 if I go to my specialist. And my prescriptions cost $5. Well, maybe more than $5. But the idea is that the person who's purchasing the insurance can compare apples to apples and make an intelligent decision. So there's an attorney in Philadelphia, Tony DiUlio, who's working on coming up with the chart. I know there are some public adjusters in California who are working on coming up with ways to evaluate insurance like that. And there was a group in Texas who came out with a chart a few years ago. What makes that difficult, of course, is the policies are constantly changing. There are many, many policies, and the definitions of the words aren't consistent throughout every policy. So if you look up in your chart the word water, for instance, or marring, it's different in every policy. Mold means something different. So one thing that we've been trying to do is, before, again, incremental steps, before we get to the minimum standards policy, maybe have standard definitions. We've been talking to some people at NCOIL about that. So NCOIL, is a group of insurance legislators from the various states. And we've been discussing with them the idea of maybe having universal definitions for every policy so that when people compare one policy to another, they can understand what the differences are. We're also working with brokers, and I know that Amy Bach has reached out to brokers before to try and work with us, and I've recently been contacted by someone in New York who works with agents and brokers and is meeting with regulators in that area, working on his end to try and educate people and so that people know what's in policies. And then it comes to regulators and legislators. And what we've been doing on that end is meeting with them about, again, before we get to the big reach of the minimum standards policy, talking about what they can do to make things more transparent for consumers. They can be disclosures in policies so that people know what it is they're purchasing. If any of you are familiar with auto policies, with limited tort in some states, they have a check the box. So it would be something like that. Yes, I understand that I'm not purchasing coverage for XYZ. Yes, I understand that if I have a claim about XYZ, I won't be covered. To put it in simple words so that people who are purchasing understand. So we're actually meeting with a legislator to talk about implementing legislation like that to help people figure out what it is that they're purchasing. And then again, we're working with NCOIL and NAIC. And again, even though we're not asking for the big ask yet, we're meeting with people, letting them know who we are, letting them know that we're concerned about this issue, building trust, building relationships. So when we get to that, it'll be easier. And another avenue of regulation is compliance with federal mortgage rules. Most mortgage agreements provide that homeowners purchase replacement value coverage insurance, yet states routinely pass and allow policies that don't provide replacement value coverage for people that have these mortgages. So there's a conflict between the federal regulation and the state regulation. And that's something that I know Amy Bach has been working on very hard over the past few months. Again, the standard policies that we set in our minimum standards policy may not be the same for every state because different regions have different needs, different weather patterns, and it may require something for the Southeast that's different than something for the Southwest. The other thing is, and Chip I know is talking about this, coordinating litigation and briefing. litigation is sometimes an answer to some of these problems, especially with limitations in endorsements. So we want to make sure that all of the litigation is coordinated so that we achieve good results. And Chip, I'll let you speak to that for a moment.
Well, it's really important. This is something that United Policyholders has been doing for the last 20 years, and we participate in their amicus project. And that's where if somebody's got a particular case that's going on and it's going to be up on appeal, it's going to go to a Supreme Court, we want to make certain that we don't have bad law made for policyholders. That's just the bottom line. And getting sometimes the best in the field, the best that know these arguments to help and show judges. Because we now have got to educate the judiciary about what these words mean. And often they've never seen this before. Judges come from all kinds of different practices. They don't know insurance. And that's where United Policyholders is fit in. But we also want to use this group, especially with respect to insurance coverage gaps, to be able to explain what is going on with insurance industries. And Holly, I'm going to sort of finish up on all this. This is a really important topic. Insurance is a great product. It's a man-made product. It's a product that involves the public trust, but all of us depend upon it. And there's certain rules and regulations that have always been in place. And even when you talk about the mortgages, what really is going on right now, the insurance companies, to compete against themselves, are trying to get one step ahead by writing insurance policies that are like Swiss cheese to beat the other person who might be selling something that's worth $100. They're going to sell something that's really worth $90 and get away with it and make more profits as a result of not disclosing to their customers exactly what they're doing. This problem is really being caused by the insurance industry that is changing insurance policy from what used to be standard insurance policy would cover these various things to now we've got insurance gaps. They don't even satisfy mortgage requirements for many of what the mortgages that are out there. Federal regulations, I often call it selling illegal insurance, and we need to help insurance companies stop doing what they're doing. But they're not, they're in a race to the bottom. And I always say, so long as we take care of the policyholder, which our law firm's all about first, the policyholder, everybody else in place will come along. And that means, contractors have money enough to go ahead because the insurance is paid to cover things such as simple water, losses for pipes and things like that. What Holly talked about, it should almost be criminal to sell a fire insurance policy and then on page 79 of 82 say, oh, by the way, we don't cover wildfire. Are you kidding me? I mean, but that's what's going on because for one reason or another, it hadn't been brought to the attention of the insurance commissioners' offices that this is what's going on and how the insurance companies are now trying to compete against one another and leaving this problem for policyholders having uninsured gaps in coverage. So, you know me, I'm going to do something about that. I don't just sit back. And there's a number of things we can do that's actually already started. For those of you who are watching this, though, the first thing that you can do is to help send examples of people, and that's policyholders that have been damned as a result of this type of conduct. Send copies of policies. We've been getting these right and left so we can send these to Amy Bach and to Holly because they're actually doing something. I believe it. Get with organizations that actually do something, not just say they're going to go do something. But we have to let other people know so that you can help us out. So I applaud Apia in this. I applaud the United Policyholders for what they're doing. Jay Fineman's up there working real hard up at Rutgers trying to show this particular issue with respect to, from an academic standpoint. It's a growing trend in the insurance industry, and we've got to stop it. It's not helpful to anybody whatsoever. So this is just the first start on this. We're going to be sending out some emails about what you can do. We're going to be letting you know when the next National Association of Insurance Commissioners meetings can come back and what you can do on a state-by-state level. I've probably said enough so far today, but boy, you can tell I'm passionate about because if we don't stop this, there's not going to be anything left of these insurance policies. And we know the insurance companies are not stupid. They try to sell this as saying, oh, we're giving insurance consumers free choice about what they want without a full explanation of what's required under their mortgages, whether it's a business or a homeowner's mortgage, and they're selling less than what's being required there. And they're also trying to say, oh, you can get something for a lot less. Why don't you go ahead and buy that, leaving gaping holes with respect to their insurance coverage. It's got to stop. It's not good for society. And we're going to put a highlight on this with respect to regulators and insurance legislatures, but we need your help. So having said that, I probably said enough. I could say more, but this is a good start. Thanks for being in attendance today, and we'll be getting back to you.
Thanks, Chip.